Hey 3D makers, how's it going? Today I'm going to take you through some support information, some tips and tricks, some lessons learned, and I know what you might be saying, oh, not another support video on YouTube, but I've watched many of them, many hours from some of the greats, like Uncle Jesse and 3D Printing Pro, and there's absolutely some excellent information there, and you should check that out. However, even after watching all of that, getting my printer and really trying it out for myself, I learned a couple of things, and I'm going to pass that information on to you so that you maybe can take some of this information and maybe tweak your workflow. It might make things a little interesting for you. So I'll give you a couple options, of course. I don't think there's any one thing that works for anybody or works for every model. So I'll give you a couple of different scenarios, things you could use that may or may not be successful, depending. Of course, you want to try them out and see what works for you. But I figured I'd start today with this because I think this is a very important shape to talk about. So this is the sort of initial test print that comes with the Anycubic Mono X, and it's probably the first thing that a lot of people print with that printer. I certainly did. And it's a very interesting shape that I think really highlights support theory and why. So if you think about this particular model, right, it just comes right on the USB drive right when you open the box. You unpack everything, you set it up, you level your build plate, shake up some resin, pour it in, hit the print button. Hopefully this is what comes out on the other end like it did for me. If you think about that, this has no supports on it, right? It has nothing. And, well, not that it has nothing, but it is supporting itself, which I think is the most interesting part, right? So if you think about it, you have this disc here that's the starting point, and every dimension of this is just slowly building from another support point. So if you think about it this way, the entire thing is a support. It itself is a support. So so in a lot of cases, I think people just maybe underestimate the ability of the printer to kind of support itself and the material to support itself and build upon itself, but it requires the proper structure. Okay, so I think looking back now, after having done a whole bunch of prints, and when I just happened to have this cube here on my desk, and I was thinking, this doesn't have any prints. And if I downloaded something that looked like this, I'd probably be adding support over here in this corner, maybe all these things hanging over. You'd say, oh my gosh, I need to support all of these things. But if you look at this, here it is. It's sort of self-supported based on its own structure. Okay, I think that's an important thing to talk about, because there is that is an element of supporting the model is what shape is it already, and why, and what do you need to support and why. So, and then how do you go about supporting it in the best way possible. I had an interesting experience with this particular model. This is not supposed to look like a finch. It's supposed to be a sort of more viciously beaked raven sitting on some skulls. This is after I kind of cleaned up this fail here. So the beak really failed, and I'll show you this model. I'll show you why it failed, and I'll show you how I adjusted my workflow to support this differently. And eventually I've had very successful large prints, and you can do this too. So this is all hand supported here, and I'll kind of walk through why I did this way. And this of course came out awesome. I have another video where I have kind of a actual the cleaned up model of this, and you can see it. So let's take a look over at Lychee and see what this raven was supposed to look like. So at first blush you think, look at this. You can see this beak was supposed to be a lot bigger. It got cut off like around here somewhere where my supports were. Now, you first look at this and you say, well, you had some decent supports on here. What went wrong? I'll tell you what went wrong. A number of things. But and on this edge too, by the way, I didn't have. There's a couple of spots where this just bent a little. And here's another thing. It's not always about the supports necessarily. It could also be about your lift speed, your drying, curing time for each layer, things like that. So there's a lot of elements, and it's not all supports always. It's a combination of all these things, of course, to get you a successful print. This is how this looked when I printed that model out, and I learned a lot of things, and we'll go through how I adjusted my what I would have done differently here. So one type of workflow that I think a lot of people use, they'll have something like this, and you know what? I'm gonna just chuck all these supports, and we can start from scratch, and we'll kind of walk through this together. So see you later, supports. Yep, goodbye. Okay. Just give my poor computer a second to catch up. Is it doing it? Yeah. All right. Cool. Some people would come in, take the model, angle it, and throw on some auto supports. That is a way to do it, right? So the model will come in, it's probably flat to the base. A lot of people say, you don't want to print flat to the base. Trying to peel this off of your build plate would be very difficult. So there's a lot of things that I did wrong here, and I'm going to go through a couple of them. But this is such a big flat base. If you had to try to free this and you don't have one of those flexible build plates, you would have a heck of a time getting this off. So step one, everybody tries to kind of lift an angle. The next workflow I think a lot of people use, they come in, they lift this up, and then some people will come in and just say, generate automatic supports. Now there's a couple of interesting things here. When you generate automatic supports, it takes on whatever your settings are above here. So, for example, if I put it on light and then I say generate automatic supports, it's going to go through and generate all light automatic supports. This is how I had my first and only ever fail was, well, aside from this busted beak situation, I had a very small skull, about 2 inches by 1.5 inches or so. It's like a golf ball size, maybe. And I came in here, I said, I'm going to do this, bold style and see if it really fails. Sure enough, it failed. I plopped the skull in, I turned it in an angle, I hit light, I hit generate supports, I dragged it to my printer, I hit print, ended up with a pancake. It's the only fail. I said, well, that's the last time I do that. So this is what you'd get if you hit light, you hit auto supports. Okay. Interestingly enough, if you chuck all these, if you were to say, give me heavy and generate automatic supports, you'll get all heavy supports. So that's the first thing to be aware of. And I'm using low support density, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But just sort of starting up here with these, the auto supports inherits your permissions here, and it applies those settings to all of the auto supports. So now, when this finishes, you'll see I've got a big pile of all heavy supports. Ta-da! And that may or may not be what you want either. So one important thing I think people don't highlight there, right? If you've got a model like this, and you have to take into consideration what the model is. Is it some small light object? Is it a sort of chunky thing like this? That's going to definitely influence the weight of this piece, because you have to remember you're building all this upside down. Okay, so auto supports inherits these settings up here. That's an important step for this particular workflow, because I think a lot of people would come in here, hit generate auto supports. You have to figure out which of these it is. Now, the other cool thing is you can tweak these, right? So you can say, I want medium supports, but I don't want to do so much damage. I want to pull them down to like 45, so that they're not making so many marks on my model. And then again, you can hit generate. It'll generate these, and off you go. Actually, let's just do that for kicks because I want to show you something else. So now, even though they're medium support diameter, you can still tune the tip down, and this is available even in the free version. I have the evaluation turned on right now, so I could get even fancier, but I haven't really needed to do any of that yet. Okay, so we're still on the first workflow here. Bring your model in, tilt it up, and generate some auto supports. I guess I should show you how to rotate in case you don't know how to do that. That's over at the layout, and you can just rotate with these gizmos here. Whatever dimension you want. Hopefully you know how to do that. In case that's where it is, it's on the layout tab. You can move it, you can scale it. Anyway, okay, we've got our mediums. We tuned down our tip diameter. That's pretty cool. Now, here's the mistake I made on originally. I came in here and I did just that. I came in, I put it on light. I put it on, I'm not even sure I probably had like normal support density. I hit generate, it generated it, and I had some support here on the beak. I said that looks great. And then what a lot of people will tell you to do is come in here, generate the autos, then look for islands, which people look for islands. You come in here, we'll see if there's any islands left. Look for islands. Okay, there's 6. You can spin around. If you hit show, it'll show you where they are. You can add some supports to your islands. And until they're gone, which I don't know how I'm going to get. Some of these are like impossibly. Oh, I got it. If it's hidden, I always just zoom in because you'll find it eventually. These, I don't think I would actually bother supporting, but you can. For the sake of this video, I'll run around and try to support all these. Wow, this one's way up here. If you zoom in a bit, and we can grab that. Okay, so that's part of the workflow I think a lot of folks would do. No islands, great. So then they think I'm fine. I've got no islands, I've auto-supported, go over to export, off you go. Okay. That's pretty much what I did when I had my beak failure here. And I'll tell you why that is. Because the weight and the distance of this is important. So the object is big, right? For example, and this isn't even that big, but I was using a light support. So the light support, it's pretty thin. It's only 1 millimeter. And the distance from the build plate to the beak where I had this connecting is pretty substantial. Substantial enough where, here's what happens. Let me see if I can give you a good example of this thing building. So you're building away happily. While this is building, let me jump back here for a second. I'll give you this in a real world sort of scenario. You come in here, grab a light support. Stick it on the beak. Okay. Now let's take a look at this. As you're printing this, look what's happening here. This is building upside down. Here's your support, right? It starts off. It starts building. It's going. It's going. It's going. It's touching nothing yet. It's just getting longer and longer, longer and longer and longer. If it's only a small diameter support, this is never going to sustain with the motion of the build plate as it's kind of doing this thing, and just heat and time and dripping and whatever, a skinny, light thing that's just one or two long straight beams like this, even though I had two and they were braced. Go figure, you think that would have been good enough. But I had two here, they were braced. But by the time their target shows up, if you will, down here, this thing has warped, and then you're missing your mark. So this is exactly what happened. This thing came down here, it was just off enough where it did not support this beak. It was off the tiniest amount. Didn't support the beak. They sort of missed their connection, and this whole tip of the beak here didn't build. Okay. Learning from that, I thought to myself, aha, this is, you don't want this, right? If you're going to have a long run of a support like this, it needs to be more robust. So what would I do differently? Come back in here, and on my larger, heavier models where I'm going to have supports, I do a couple of things. Do a couple things differently. One, I would make this a medium. Thicken it up. I've been using 2 millimeters on these tall ones. I still bring the tip diameter down to about 45. And tip length, depending if you've got a massive model. This is a Mono X, so it has pretty big pieces you might be trying to fit around. You can increase the tip length if you need to. This I would, just because I feel like this is too stocky. So I've been bringing mine to about 5, just in case. Well, 485, fine. Okay, so I've been using medium supports, and it's working out much better. And I'm also printing things that are a bit bigger and heavier. So you don't have to go all the way to heavy necessarily, but I've been using mediums. The other thing with about these settings, diameter of 2 for a long run like this, and right now I'm printing a pair of wings that they're almost the full size of this. So I've got supports way the hell up here. So the other thing that I've been doing is, if I'm making a long run like this, I make sure I have, even if I only need one here at the beak, for example, I'll put one next to it, in as innocuous a place as possible, so that it's not leaving marks all over your model. If you can find a nice place to hide a support that's near your other support, I would do that, and then I would just throw some bracings on. Now you've got a much stronger support, and your support is supported, right? I think that's an important distinction. If you're going to try to come in here, just take one, I don't know, 8-inch long support from the bottom of the build plate to the model, and you think you're going to meet the connection point, it's likely to give you some trouble. So anyway, beef up some of those longer supports. I think you'll do a lot better. Okay, so that was all workflow number 1. What I've been doing lately, which I think is interesting, is I've been coming in. You can sort of see it here. I've been coming in, searching for islands first. Why first? I want to know where my islands are, and I don't want to do it last, because this one's not too bad. There's only 24. Let's say I bring my model over here. I'm going to get ready to spend some time putting supports on here. I don't want to spend, half an hour putting supports on, then look for islands after, because if there's a crap ton of islands, you may, instead of just supporting all of the islands, what you might want to do is just pop back over here, rotate the model a little bit so that you can take some of the islands away, right? The orientation definitely matters, and then you can come back in here, check out your islands, see if they've changed it at all. Especially if you're printing out something that has a lot of like armor and points. See, I have far fewer islands now. On the whole. So if you're printing out something that's like got chains or spikes or something else, you could potentially have an island showing up on every point of every spike of a large, I don't know, dragon or piece of armor or something, right? And then you're like, well, crap, I just spent a bunch of time putting all these supports on. Then I looked for my islands, and I've got all these little points where if you simply just tilted the model maybe just a few degrees differently, those may support themselves, much like when we opened and we looked at the Anycubic cube. That thing was self-supporting because it was able to build material on its own self, right? So sometimes just by making a tweak to the orientation of your model, you can clean up a lot of islands. So I'll come in here. The other thing I like to do is anything that's, and I think this is probably standard convention. You'll hear this in other videos, I'm sure. But sort of the most important parts of your model you want facing up, away from the build plate, because those are the ones that are able to, if there are points and things, you sort of want them pointing upward if you can, because you can build nice pointy objects just in resin without having to support them potentially, depending, as long as there's enough structure there and they're not, being built out in the land. Okay, so the workflow I changed to, we talked about the first one, auto support, then look for islands, support the islands print. That's one way to do it. I would say, and I've been doing this lately, and that's how I supported the some of my larger models recently, is I come in here, I detect islands first, and I'm just using fast. See where the islands are. If I've got a big pile of islands and I don't like how it's looking, give the model a little tweak, add my supports to the places that make sense, and then, okay, I think it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it just in case. You're not looking to support just the islands, right? You'll also want to come in here and support your model, right? Don't think about only supporting the islands. You want to support the object itself. Think about it in overhangs, but also in in islands and overhangs and things. But you also want to think about it as a giant chunk of plastic that's moving up and down a build plate, and it needs some strength to hold it in place. So there are places this would probably print fine, provided this is anchored to the build plate correctly. But if I could find a couple of spots, around, under, that are a bit hidden, I would certainly throw some supports around. You don't want to try to, you don't want to just go like this, put one here, put one here, put one here, throw a bunch in the end, and then say, yep, that's probably sturdy. It might be, but it might not be. And you might not find out that it's not until 5 hours into the print or something, when you've got a problem up here somewhere. That's a bad time to find out that that your model's not supported. If it tilts, if it leans, if something happens and you start getting distortions or lines or something else, I would not feel comfortable printing it with this few supports. So you don't want to support just the islands. There's a balance here. But I would come in. I usually like to show the islands. It just makes it easier to find them. Throw supports on your islands. And then, of course, support your supports. Here's a good spot here. This is technique straight out of 3D Printing Pro. But if you look at this nice thin line here, and you notice that it gets sort of bunched up and chunky, it's probably a decent place for a support. So support your supports. Support your islands, because those probably have overhangs. And then you should be good to go. I'm not a fan of putting supports on the model itself. I always try to seek the ground. That's another reason probably that I'm using settings like this, that are a little thicker support. Uh, I like to have my support seeking the ground so that I don't have to have marks on my model, especially something that's sort of fine detail like this. You might be able to hide a couple supports, but on something smooth like this, you're sure to get a mark that you might have to either get some really light sandpaper, like, I don't know, 400 or 600, or sometimes I use like a Scotch-Brite or something and just barely get it off there, and then you're able to hit it with some primer and it looks fine. But anyway, okay. So that's the other workflow, the workflow I've been using recently. Look for islands first, then support my model. Is this how I would let this go? Probably not. I'm probably inclined to add a few more supports in here. Probably put a couple more under this, under the model and things here, just to make sure it's supported throughout. This is in the back, so that's not too bad. And then I don't like supports all off by themselves. Like I talked about, I would probably try to sneak another one in some other place that would be not too obvious, just so that my support has supports. That way if I throw bracings in here, these are all nice and sturdy and they're not going to miss their targets by the time the print is done. Another thing I want to talk about, sometimes it's hard to find these, I'm just clicking on them because it's habit, but okay. Another thing I want to talk about is holes. Should I do a whole separate video for holes? No, probably doesn't warrant its own video. Holes are important when you're hollowing because it saves you resin. However, it makes it a real bugger to clean. So, these holes, far too small, especially for a model this chunky. So I certainly would not recommend a hole this small. If you can get away with it, I would make a hole a minimum of 12. 6 is probably fine. If you're hollowing, you're usually probably doing 2.5 millimeters on the shell anyway. But yeah, use lattice. But I would be inclined to put a couple of holes, and I try to target them under these cavities where you know you're going to have probably, oops, that's the support. You're probably going to have some resin accumulating in here. Probably going to have some resin accumulating under this other skull. You can try to see where it connects under there somewhere. I will put some good sized holes throughout your model. It just makes it easier if you can dunk the whole thing into some isopropyl alcohol, swish it around, rinse it out, dunk it again, swish it around, rinse it out. You can get the loose resin out of the inside of this. It also makes it easier just to get UV light in here if there are a few. I would probably be inclined to put I don't know, a handful of holes in the bottom of this, probably 3 or 4, and then I might even I printed the Raven with a small hole under one of his legs somewhere that was not easy to see. Yeah, here. Back here I stuck a small hole. Unfortunately though, that was small enough, so small, 4 millimeters, where I couldn't really clean and rinse the inside of this very well, and I couldn't cure this very well with light. It's like behind this skull here, and not really easy to get light in there. So I did have some like resin over time kind of came out, and I got that like shiny look on the tail here as this was curing. So I would be inclined to, doing this again, I would be inclined to either leave this solid or change my holes. But I don't think there's any trouble in leaving this solid if you can. And how would you do that? You'd have to print these in separate pieces, right? You'd have to have this. There is a version of this, I think, that is not a single model but separate objects, and you could print the objects separately and then assemble them. So I don't know if there's such a thing as selective hollowing. Can you only hollow a model? I don't know. I'm going to look into that. I'll get back to you on that. Anyway, That's a couple of different ideas on supports. I've been seeking my islands first and then adding them. I think it works better and saves you some pain, saves you some rework, and make sure you've got sufficient holes here. Like, 1 4 millimeter hole in this thing is not really going to cut it. So you want some good holes so you can clean and cure this. I think that's all I have for now. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and I got more videos coming. Thanks. Bye.